Welcome. We're really glad you're here. Around our family, the door is usually open, the table's usually full, and somehow there's always room for one more.
This podcast is about making room for faith, for family, for laughter, for the messy and the meaningful. It's about inviting you into our family culture and letting you experience the joy and chaos of a big family right alongside us.
We're moms, daughters, sisters, and friends.
All in different seasons of life, but we're all gathered around the same table.
So pull up a chair, take a deep breath, and stay a while, because love multiplies when we make room, and there is always one more seat at the table. Hello, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Room for More podcast. I am Noelle, here as always, joined today with my sister and my mom and a very special guest.
Hi, I'm Faith.
And I'm their mom, Patricia.
And my mom is going to introduce our special guest for you guys today. This has been, I want to say long awaited. I mean, we talked about this like 2 weeks ago, and we've been so excited. We had so many questions for this person, so we're very excited to introduce him to you.
Okay, so this is Dr. Mike Skoch, who affectionately likes to be referred to as Mike. Originally, we met him through our parish in our small town here in Nebraska, and just couldn't help but notice the whole family dynamic because he was the father of 6 at the time. I just remember seeing them with their 6 kids and just looked like a very joyful family, but mostly I remember hearing them. Mike would play the organ for most masses, and I think Jenny at the time would sing a lot of those too. So they have a lot of talent in their family, I would say musically, especially. But anyway, since it's a small town, I think, and Mike could speak to this, but there was a lot of parishioners that were also patients. So that probably offered its own challenges and also really great things too, but I'm sure challenges. So the main thing was that Dr. Skoch had aligned himself with Catholic teaching in his practice. So it was the natural choice for us to just seek him out as our family doctor once Dad and I got married and started to think about family planning. So he has delivered 7 out of 8 of you guys, of our children. And so it's really a full circle moment. This is really amazing. I would have never thought all of those years ago, like you said, almost 30 years ago, that now I would have adult daughters that would be also seeking advice from Dr. Skoch. He went through a lot with our family in terms of not only births, but lots of fevers, surgeries, health scares, postpartum depression, nursing, all of the things. It's really cool for me now that you guys can also lean into his wisdom. So with all of that said, we're really excited to have you, Mike, here with us, and can't wait to learn even more of what you have to offer.
It's great to be here.
Well, Faith, would you like to dive into a little popcorn Q&A so we can get to know Dr. Skoch a little bit?
Okay, well, one quick note that, and I know we're going to touch on this at the end, but Dr. Skoch is also an author, and so we would love to hear a little bit about your book. We might save a little bit of that for the end to give you a little book plug, because I would love to hear more about that. But you're just a multifaceted person, so there's so much that we can dive into here, so we'll probably just barely scratch the surface today. But just a couple of random rapid-fire questions. So, Dr. Skoch, do you prefer coffee or tea?
Coffee.
For sure.
But I can only have so much coffee because several years ago I woke up in the middle of the night once thinking I was in atrial fibrillation, which is a bad heart problem. And like 24 hours later, after an admission to the hospital, the cardiologist said, "How much coffee do you drink?"
Oh, shoot.
Everything was normal. Everything was normal,
Yeah.
thanks be to God. But yeah, so I have to watch my coffee intake, but far prefer that over tea.
Yep.
That must be kind of an age issue thing, because I experienced that recently too, of just like, it really, like, I can be dead tired, but if I have it beyond a certain time of night, I'll have like the
heart palpitations.
Yeah, it's crazy.
What's
all right? Are you?
Sorry, wait. Can I interject here?
Yes, please do.
What is your caffeine like milligrams threshhold, would you say, where you're like, I can have that much, but like a little bit more, that's just over the top?
Yeah, I don't measure it in milligrams because I have no idea. But it's a cup.
1 cup.
I could probably tolerate a 16-ounce cup. At the most in a day. Otherwise, yeah, it does bad things to me.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm a 3-cup-a-day girl right now, and that seems like a little excessive to me. But when you have
Whatever
little
gets you
kids,
through the
I don't know.
sleepless
I'm like,
nights.
I remember mom telling us when we were little, not when we were little, but when I was in high school, she's like, you know what? I'm addicted to coffee, but there's worse things to be addicted to. And that's always like played in my mind. I'm like, I love this. I can't stop.
Can't stop, won't stop.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you a early bird or a night owl?
Early bird. Yes, I'm usually up by 4:30, 5 o'clock, awake.
Wow.
Yeah, and then I try to get to an early morning mass every day. So
That's awesome.
yeah.
Great. What is one hobby that you have that people would be surprised about?
Well, I probably would have to say music, although it's not really a hobby. It's really kind of a lifestyle. Most people are surprised to know that I am a church organist and have been for most of my life, really. So that I always answer that question with that.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. If you weren't a doctor, what would you be?
Oh my goodness. I think one of my mom's biggest disappointments was that I, in fact, did not get a degree in music. I started young and I was able to redeem myself only with an MD, In her eyes, when I finally was able to be called doctor, I think she forgave me for not having gotten a degree in medicine. So if I weren't a physician, honestly, it probably would be something in music, professional level. Yeah.
Yeah. You're
I feel
pretty
like
good at it too, so.
we totally took you guys for granted when you were at our church growing up. Like it was just so amazing all the time that I feel like then once you guys moved away, it was like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
what, like this feels
Still
like a
struggles.
blank slate. Like there's nothing here.
Totally.
So
You definitely
guys
feel
are
a difference.
huge blessing wherever you go with your musical
It
talent.
was
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
fun.
Absolutely.
It's been really fun to contribute wherever we've been. It's been very good.
How does your faith influence the way you practice medicine?
Actually, I would hope that it influences every facet of my practice. My wife and I were both Kansas natives. I trained in Kansas, and the good Lord called us to Hastings for a lot of reasons. But one of the very first reasons was I needed to get some things right with my medical practice and my faith. I had trained at a Catholic hospital and actually was taught to prescribe contraceptives and do sterilization procedures. And I never really quite, resolved that conflict. I just lived with the assumption that, because it was happening in the Catholic hospital, well, there had to be some rule that I didn't know that allowed that to go on. And within 90 days of arriving in Hastings, you guys may remember Father Joseph Walsh, who is my contemporary. He and I are actually 2 weeks apart. And he was a young whippersnapper priest, and I was a young whippersnapper doctor. And he called me into his office in the rectory at St. Cecilia one day. It was a Saturday. I was on call, and it worked to go there. And when he called, I thought, oh, wow, I get to meet a priest. And, it was just, I had this problem in my head. It was totally different than what I anticipated. We had a really good conversation, and at one point he asked me to become the Catholic doctor in town. And I offered up all the excuses as to why I could not do that, because, who would come and who in their right mind, what woman in her right mind would come to see a doctor who doesn't prescribe the pill, for heaven's sake? And then he did this. He lowered his glasses to the end of his nose, and he looked at me with all of the love that I know Jesus looked at Peter after Peter denied him those 3 times. And he said to me, Dr. Skoch, if you don't stop doing, he said, Dr. Skoch, I cannot speak for my brother priests, but if you don't stop doing what you're doing, I can't give you Holy Communion. And that was the fall of 1987. And it took me about a year to work into that. And it was by the grace of God. Hi, Grace. Speaking of grace.
Welcome, Grace.
It was by the grace of God that, I was able to stop prescribing. And then I converted my practice and, really never looked back. God just kept showering blessings and his infinite mercy. So sorry for the long-winded answer, Faith, but there you go.
No, that's a beautiful
great.
answer.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Thank you for that. So we know you really closely as a doctor, but how would your friends describe you outside of work? or your family?
Well, I don't know that I have a good sense of that, but I would hope that my friends would describe me as loyal, sincere, trustworthy. I'm sure that I probably could also be described as rigid and actually maybe even unforgiving. But I would hope that my friends would, know that there are a few things in life, family and relationship with God notwithstanding. There are a few other things in life that are as important as relationships with friends.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, last one from me, and then Noelle can jump into the main segment of our podcast. But if you could give every mom listening one piece of advice, what would it be?
Well, I said this, and your mom knows this. I said this often in my practice years. I encouraged the moms that I was privileged to care for to trust their maternal instinct. That is a God-given gift, and never, ever mistrust yourself as a mother. It's not about being right or wrong. It's about the love that God has planted in your heart for your child. And I would rather have seen, a child 100 times and have everything be fine than to have, a mother not come because she second guessed herself and have it be, something serious. So yeah, I would have to say, trust your maternal instinct.
That actually gave me chills. Yes.
I love that.
That gave me chills because that was one of the biggest things that you've said to us, Mom. Mm-hmm. So yeah, and now I know where you got it.
Yeah. So it just is generationally transferring on, which
what is this?
Is a really big deal.
This is snaps.
We agree.
Amen. Yes. Amen.
Okay. I didn't know either, Mike.
Yeah, right.
Sorry. This is the millennial. Is this millennial or Gen Z? I don't know what we are, but
I don't know.
Whatever generation we are, that's what we do.
I think your age group, you kind of cross the line there.
We totally
do. We do.
And millennials. So yeah, sure. Yeah.
Well, thank you for answering those. Noelle's going to ask a little bit of deeper, more specific to our listeners' questions.
Okay.
But hopefully that just scratched the surface as to introducing you a little bit more.
Yeah.
Really quick before you say that, Noelle, I was just going to mention the other thing that I really that I remember you saying, Mike, and it having a really big impact on Rob and I, and something that we remind ourselves of often. And you girls have probably heard me say this, but parenting is just a process of letting go. I remember you saying that when I, wanted to transfer the baby into a different room, and that was a big deal at the time, and all of those things are really big deals, but it's just one step at a time. And then eventually, your kids have wings and then they are parents too. But I was just going to mention that because sometimes I think the impact that we have on others, sometimes we maybe don't realize just how far that can go in terms of being something that's passed on. And I think if anything, I hope that you guys will also remember that and pass that on to your kids. So
yeah, that's definitely something that it sticks with me too. Cause I mean, as a young parent, that's just kind of learning the ropes of everything. It's like those things are huge deals, like moving your kid to a different room. Like they seem so small, but as a mother, it's like, oh my gosh, this is like a massive step. And just to constantly remember that you are just your child is God's first and foremost. And they're entrusted to you for a time. But at the end of the day, you are going to have to end up letting them go. It's so traumatic and sad. But it's just a natural process, Yeah.
And each time it's just preparing you for the next step. So then eventually you are taking your kid to college, which Noelle, that as being the first one, that was probably the most traumatic time.
Yeah.
It got a little bit easier each time because I learned to trust the process. And then as a father, you're walking your daughter down the aisle. All of those little things are steps along the way that are preparing you for ultimately, giving your child back to God, to heaven as their end. Yeah. As their end.
Yeah, awesome. Well, with that being said, let's dive into the meat and potatoes here. So we had several questions from our listeners and also from us too. So this is kind of random list of questions. But our first question was, how do you find a good doctor to help with hormone issues?
Well, so I did do a little research because, as I mentioned before we actually got started, I listened to your podcast last week and I realized, I'm going to be speaking to a very well-educated group of women here. I want, the last thing I want to do is look like a fool. So there are a few references, and Noelle, I did put some responses to these questions in the Google document. I don't know if you have a means of communicating with your audience in that manner, but you're certainly welcome to share, any of this. There's a few great online repositories. One of them is mycatholicdoctor.com, and another one is the St. Paul VI Institute in Omaha. It used to be known as the Pope Paul VI Institute. Their tab, the National Center for Women's Health, I think has a link to physicians by state. And then the Catholic Medical Association also has a Catholic physicians search page. Now, I will be also, hopefully, I'm sure I'm not among the first to acknowledge this, but good doctors who help with hormones do not have to be Catholic, okay? That's not the message here. I know several who are not Catholic, who live very faith-filled lives, and I'm sure you all know at least one of them, So the other thing I added in the list was be sure to ask your friends. Word travels fast in networks, and so I think that would be also another valuable tool, is just making sure that, if your friend doesn't know somebody, the chances are your friend is going to know somebody who knows somebody, and so that word of mouth contact is also good.
Yeah, that's great. I'll put all of the links to these different resources in the show notes so you guys can click on them and find a doctor that's near you that would help with whatever situation you're dealing with.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Sure.
The next question says, I have seen people online using antihistamines for PMDD. Why? And is it breastfeeding safe to try? Maybe we should first address what PMDD is, because I'm not really even sure.
Premenstrual or perimenstrual dysphoric disorder, or depressive disorder. I've heard it used as both, but it's what happens to some women, in the perimenstrual time, middle of the cycle, and into in some women, unfortunately, it carries on, until the menses occurs. The individual, the afflicted woman, is subject to just feelings of depression, anxiety that seem to come out of nowhere, and have the potential actually to wreak havoc for the woman who suffers. There's a different acronym, there's a different set of letters that apply to the postpartum dysphoria, the postpartum, depression that occurs after birth. And so, quite honestly, I had a little difficulty with knowing which the individual who posed this question was referring to, because the second half of the question relates also to breastfeeding. So the bottom line is, why have antihistamines been tried? Well, I can tell you that it is not an evidence-based treatment, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't necessarily work. And I put a link in here as well that you're welcome to share about a reference to antihistamines and the potential reduction of breast milk supply. The first generation antihistamines, Benadryl, is the most common one that comes to mind. It also has, really challenging side effect of making people drowsy. Probably not as helpful and more apt actually to reduce milk supply than the second generation antihistamines, names that you all may recognize, including Claritin or Zyrtec, or the generics of those, which actually seem to be anecdotally, again, this is not evidence-based treatment, but anecdotally more effective, and they are responsible for fewer side effects as well.
Interesting. Okay, the next question is hormones. Well, let me rephrase this. Do hormones have an effect on mental health? And this person is asking specifically about OCD, anxiety, and depression during the menstrual cycle.
Yes, so this is, somewhat related to the prior question, except it's with reference to hormones. I have to say, again, a very good question. That said, it is really an extremely complex question, and if we could probably spend the rest of the hour talking about, a response to this. To try to sum it up, the bottom line is really that hormones, women's hormones, estrogen, progesterone primarily, are not known to cause mood disorders. The natural fluctuation of levels of estrogen and progesterone, and particularly estrogen, through the course of the menstrual cycle may in fact impact the nature of existing mood disorders. In other words, it may give an underlying tendency to be anxious or an underlying tendency to feel depressed. It may, aggravate them. These hormones may aggravate those, but they don't cause them. And the relationship is actually not well understood outside of the experience of women who have postmenstrual or premenstrual syndrome or postpartum depression. I also put a link in here. This article is a little medical. If your listeners are up for a challenge, certainly welcome to read it. That said, it does have some fairly practical information as well. It's titled Estrogen, Stress, and Depression, Cognitive and Biological Interactions. So it's out there.
So a question for you relating to this, kind of like to bounce off of it. Do you think that this seems like there's not really an answer for this and there's not a lot that's understood? Do you think that is because there's not really a lot of research done on women's hormones and just like not much is studied about women? Like there hasn't been much funding into that sort of studies to learn those kind of things? Or is it just like really complex? So like we'll never know sort of thing?
I would say more of the latter. It's very complex. It is not that we'll never know, but it's very complex, and there's a significant element of individuality, Noelle. And so research certainly exists. That said, I will also be among the first to admit that there's a big segment of medicine that really sort of gets this wrong. Categoric answer for treatment of these issues is to recommend hormonal contraceptives. And while that is tantamount to putting a Band-Aid on an open wound, that's really all it is. It doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't fix the problem. It covers the problem over, because if you saw a graph of the natural fluctuations of estrogen and progesterone in your menstrual cycle, and you saw a graph of the same hormones while a woman is taking an oral contraceptive, you would be shocked, because the prescription drugs simply flatten out the curves, and there is no natural fluctuation. But it does cover up the symptoms, and so, it's handed out when really the treatment needs to, I think, be much more individualized.
Oh, sorry.
I was just going to ask if that is like how in med school it's trained to be that way, and doctors have to like do a little more research on their own to figure that out, or that's like common protocol?
Yeah, Grace, it is kind of a common protocol. That said, I've encountered a significant number of medical students even these days who are much more inquisitive than I ever thought about being in medical school. Everything I ever learned about this, I learned, in the early years of my practice. There are some extremely bright medical students, extremely inquisitive medical students who are asking, all of the pertinent questions and actually tailoring their training to, go beneath the surface and not accept, the conventional wisdom here.
That's very encouraging.
That's helpful.
Yeah. That is very encouraging.
Yeah.
I feel like sorry, I was just going to say I can I can see that in action in my own life, because when I was pregnant, I was like the most level I've ever been. Like not a whole lot of mood fluctuations, not as much anxiety. I don't know. It's just so crazy and that's all related to hormones, because I wasn't a part of the hormonal episode last week because of a conflict, but I just find that very intriguing that there actually is I don't know. I just feel like we kind of, as women, we gaslight ourselves a lot as we just tell ourselves, oh, I'm just crazy, or I don't know, I'm just really sad today, or we don't have an answer. But it just is so affirming, I think, for women to realize a lot of this is out of your control to an extent with your hormones and all of that playing a factor.
That's a great observation, Faith. You said a minute ago that when you were pregnant, you were as level as you can remember, for a reasonable period of time. Well, so to that end, pregnancy is a progesterone-dominated condition. Progesterone is essential for stability of early pregnancy, even actually throughout the entire pregnancy. And interestingly, women who suffer from, a post-ovulatory premenstrual syndrome and, even postpartum depression, the problem is with a relative insufficiency of progesterone. And this was one of the things that I learned early on in my, looking into natural family planning and, managing a woman's cycle, in a way other than, oral contraceptives. I mean, there is a well-documented, and this has lots of research behind it. It's well-documented that, a significant number of women who suffer these conditions have a relatively low level of progesterone. And supplementing with natural progesterone is possible and very effective. And nothing is perfect, but I saw this play out time and time and time again in my patient population over the years.
I was one of them.
Yeah, maybe you could speak to this, from patient perspective.
Yeah, and I will, because there was a time that I had terrible migraines, just so many health conditions that as soon as I started taking progesterone during my cycle, for the second half of my cycle, it wiped that completely away. And also, I think for sure, well, you can never say for sure what would happen, but there's a good possibility that a couple of my babies may not have made it full term had I not had progesterone therapy. So that is also why I'm so grateful for Dr. Skoch, because him having that knowledge, and this was, as far back as well, which I hope you don't mind me saying, but is over 29 years ago. So I think at that time, and maybe I'm wrong about this, Mike, but wasn't that sort of Dr. Hilgers that was pioneering all of that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Research?
Yeah. I mean, certainly everything I learned came through the Pope Paul VI Institute in Omaha. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm eternally grateful for that. And I guess my question going off of that is, have you found, or did you notice in your practice over the years that there was any correlation in terms of genetics with progesterone being low in patients, because several of my daughters now have, low progesterone.
Yes. Well, so while, I had countless blessings from my practice years, one of the ones that stands out is I also had the privilege of delivering more than one baby to more than one woman that I actually delivered, which was
crazy.
It was just crazy.
That's
I mean, I have delivery room memories of 4 generations in the room, and it was really beautiful. But to your point, Patricia, while again there's not been a genetic link, at least to my knowledge, that has been confirmed, I can tell you in my experience there definitely is a familial nature to this. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my question with that is, progesterone is so vital for pregnancy, and in your experience, you've seen countless examples of women who are deficient. Why do they not test for progesterone right away when they go to confirm your pregnancy testing HCG?
Wow. I told you I was, speaking. I was going to be speaking. I knew I was going to be speaking with a very well-educated group of women here.
But when I was going through some fertility struggles before I got pregnant with Micah, I discovered my low progesterone, and I was significantly low. And so we started to supplement, and if I hadn't had that experience, I think I could have lost him as well, because I was already closely monitoring it. I knew I needed to supplement right away in pregnancy. And so to me, it just feels like, honestly, an injustice to women who have that, and have a lot of women have to experience multiple losses before a doctor even actually looks deeper into the issue. And so it just baffles me that women have to go through such heartache when it's preventable.
I just have to say that I will be praying that, not because I'm involved here, but because of that testimony that you just gave, that this podcast, goes viral. because your point is very well taken. I mean, it is not a standard practice. In fact, I know a physician who's spent a lifetime doing this research, and has put up with immense ridicule, for even investigating it. When I personally have seen, I wouldn't go so far as to say countless, because they're all numbered, but I have seen frequent cases. When in my practice years, I had a number of cases, just like you, Faith, who had lost a child or two, and came in with a sense of hopelessness that this is not going to happen for me, and you check a progesterone level, and I mean, it's in the tank, and you start to supplement. And can I say that it worked every single time? No, I cannot. But can I say that it worked a majority of the times, and even a vast majority of the times? Yes, I can. It's for physicians or nurse practitioners who have taken the time to do the study here. You don't have to ask, but I encourage you, and I encourage all of moms listening. Be persistent. Make the request, and if you don't get listened to, make it a demand. And if you don't get listened to, find a new doctor.
And I will say that I feel like I didn't even realize to be grateful for the fact that you, Mike, with my very first pregnancy, that was the first thing you ordered, was a progesterone test. Very simple, like along with the pregnancy test, you just did both. And I knew immediately that I was deficient and started injections like probably the very next day, if not that very day. Yeah. So in my mind, I just assumed that was common practice until I talked, as you start talking to more women and realize that it's not. And people actually think that some doctors are crazy for doing it.
Yeah. So in your mom's case, girls, I hope you don't mind me calling you girls,
Nope.
She charted her cycles.
Yeah.
And I heard in your podcast 2 weeks ago, that you guys talked about that actually. And there are certainly different methods. But for a woman who charts her cycles, she will come in and show me that something's not right. The post-ovulatory phase is usually shorter than normal. And again, there's oftentimes, a period that goes on for 10 days, or 2 weeks. I mean, the cycle, you can look on the chart and that something is not right. And that was the tip-off in your mom's case, And it was easy to order a progesterone level because I could look at her chart and I'm thinking, there's a problem here. And your mom knew it too.
Well, and knew to do a pregnancy test exactly when I needed to. Because had I waited like a week or so and thought, oh, I wonder, that might have been the vital, time period missed that I needed to use progesterone. Yeah. So it's
God
just
wanted
so
me to survive, I tell you.
For sure. And I just think overall, it's very empowering as a woman to understand your body, what it's doing. And also, if you have some understanding of that, you can help other women, because you and I both know, girls, that you talk to your girlfriends and things like that a lot about these subjects over coffee or on the telephone, whatever, and you can then help empower them. So, if you have a little background knowledge. So.
Yeah, this is all so good. Oh my gosh, I feel like we could talk for like 5 hours. But we'll move on to the next question. Okay, a lot of these are kind of, I should have like grouped these better, but they're kind of random popcorn. So thank you, Dr. Skoch, for kind of segueing into different ones. But this person is asking for advice for somebody who struggles with PMDD. Again, this seems to be common, like a bad depressive episode right before they start their period.
Yeah. Yes. So again, kind of relates to where we have been, but to address this, certainly any woman who knows that she's living with an underlying mood disorder, I would encourage that the appropriate processes be undertaken to address that as a separate issue. That may include counseling and or the use of a psychotropic medication. There are very, very good medications out there, and there are very, very good counselors out there. Premenstrual dysphoric disorder, PMDD, is actually considered by some experts to be an exacerbation of an underlying mood disorder that's present all the time that may or may not be already diagnosed. I put a link in there in this one as well, Noelle. There's a really good summary article. It's entitled Premenstrual Dysphoric Disorder. Certainly encourage your listeners to maybe go take a look if they'd like to read about it. The caveat is, again, when a woman comes in with a complaint of premenstrual syndrome, which is what it was back in my day, back in my clinical days, mainstream medicine will almost invariably recommend hormonal contraceptives. They want to just flatten it out. And yes, the woman will feel better, but it doesn't resolve the underlying issue. And there are risks involved. There are real risks involved with contraceptives, not the least of which is stroke. When I was a resident physician in training, I took care of a 27-year-old woman who came in with a stroke, classic stroke, half paralyzed for the rest of her life. She had no factors, but she'd been taking the pill, and the question was never asked. But I look back on that case, and I have often wondered, I don't think I'm inappropriate in acknowledging that really the pill probably contributed to that. That may well have caused it. Yeah,
that's sad. It's it just shows like how abnormal it is to completely flatten out a woman's cycle.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there a certain day or days in a month when you should get your hormones checked to see the big picture?
I would encourage to begin charting your cycles first. What you chart will direct you and your physician as to, how to go about assessing hormone levels. Short answer, it is not a one and done phenomenon. It requires serial blood tests really throughout the cycle. There are 4 major hormones that fluctuate during a woman's menstrual cycle: estrogen, progesterone, a hormone that triggers ovulation that has a long name, but it's known commonly as LH, and the hormone that actually is active in the early part of the cycle, building up the ovary, building up the follicle that produces the egg, and that also has a long medical name, but it's known shortly by its initials FSH. So estrogen, progesterone, LH, and FSH are the hormones that would need to be evaluated for a thorough understanding of your menstrual cycle, and you can't do those all on the same day. They have to be spaced according to how your cycles unfold.
Dr. Skoch,
I'm sorry. Would you request that women take some sort of an NFP class so that they have a little bit of information in terms of what's going on with their body?
Oh,
so
absolutely.
That they know what to look for?
Yeah, I would encourage it. Yes. I mean, if you want to know more about I can't tell you how many women I had come into my practice over the years and saying, I never knew this stuff. And so, yes, definitely would encourage your listeners to consider a simple introductory NFP class. Yes.
I think the name NFP sometimes can limit what women think they're going to get from the class, because it's not only about family planning. It's also about awareness and empowerment for women to understand what's going on in their body. So I kind of wish it had a different name, because I think this can serve women who are not married, perimenopausal women, so many different women, if they understood that it's about more than a quote unquote birth control method.
They could have taught us like in Catholic high school. That would have been amazing to learn, just to like have it as second nature. Like that would be amazing if they end up ever starting that.
That's a great point.
I do think you all had some information about that in high school and things like that.
We had an idea of like the cycle awareness in more general, but like even like if you learn to start charting and just knowing the signs of like your body's overall health, because it is a big indicator of your overall health as a woman.
Absolutely.
It does make me wonder too, like, what is the reasoning behind the lack of education in general, like among doctors or women or just everyone? Like that seems like vitally important knowledge for everyone to know.
We could probably also talk for the next hour, Grace, in the way of a response to that question.
Yeah.
Lots of layers there. The bottom line is, my thought, being a part of this is the work that you guys are doing here, with your network of listeners, having honest conversations about it. Wow. It's terrific. I mean, I applaud you all for really, taking this on, because you're doing a lot of good for, for any woman who, and actually, any spouse, I mean, any husband who's, listening, it is something that a woman takes on. But if God's will is marriage, and, you get into a marriage relationship, well, I'm telling husbands, it's a two-way street, pal. Yeah, this is no longer just the woman's responsibility here.
Totally.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was going to ask too, along the same lines of like tracking your cycle, and having to come in for different blood tests. Have you ever heard of the Mira fertility monitor, Dr. Skoch? Has that ever come up to you at all?
I have heard of it. I don't know much about it.
Yeah. So I should say I've partnered with them on my social media platforms before, but this is not a paid sponsorship or anything. They probably should sponsor this podcast. It'd be perfect for them.
Yeah, sponsor us
after this, see if we can get a sponsor. But no, it's great because I've used it for probably about a year and a half, like 18 months, last 18 months or so. And it's basically just a fertility monitor, but it tells you, instead of like the clear blue monitor was that I used to use and still do use sometimes, it's a lot more comprehensive. So they have an app where it tells you every time you test your estrogen, progesterone, LH, and FSH levels. So you know exactly where all of those levels are at. And I was actually able to download my screenshot of my app a year ago when I miscarried and send it to my doctor and say, hey, this looks like I'm progesterone deficient. And she did take that and say, yeah, you are. Let's prescribe you progesterone. So it's pretty cool to have even more modern and up-to-date things like that. That's a pretty progressive new thing that it's not even mainstream yet, I would say, because it's kind of expensive. So the opt-in, the buy-in for people is kind of high, but I think that's a great tool to have too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you know Noelle?
I'm old, Noelle, so no, nothing. There was nothing like that available when I was back in clinical practice. So.
Can you get it covered by insurance or
I don't know.
by an FSA?
Yeah, that would be
or HSA account or anything like that.
Maybe an HSA account.
Yeah.
My hunch is that mainstream insurance probably isn't covering it yet. It usually takes a number of years for the industry to wrap their arms around something being, reliable and safe and all of the parameters.
I think they just got recognized as, before they couldn't say that they were an app for couples who were trying to avoid pregnancy, because that was a liability, but now they can say that it's, trying to conceive, trying to avoid planning your family cycle. I don't know. They went through all these steps of clinical studies they had to prove before they could say this claim.
Can you say, Noelle, is it FDA approved?
Let me just do a quick Google search.
While you're doing that, I'll just maybe jump to the next question, if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So there was a question about what to take for hormonal headaches when Tylenol doesn't work. Again, I put a link in the Google Doc that Noelle can convey to all of your listeners. I found a really good summary article it's titled Clinical Recommendations for Managing Menstrual Migraine, and it's from the Association of Migraine Disorders. I highly recommend, again, the use of natural progesterone. It's available either by using what's known as a vaginal capsule. It also comes in an oral capsule, or it's injectable. Medications for classic migraines, the triptans is the class. Imitrex, most people recognize the name Imitrex, is something that has been prescribed with some benefit. Coupling that with just naproxen, over-the-counter naproxen, actually potentiates both drugs, which increases the the effectiveness. Then there is there's a nasal spray. The brand name is Migranol. I think there's another brand name as well that is used for migraines. And then actually there's some evidence that suggests that acupuncture also is effective in managing perimenstrual migraines. What'd you find, Noelle?
I found out that it is FDA registered.
Okay.
So I don't know what that means. It's registered, but maybe not approved yet.
Yes, they've submitted their paperwork. They're probably just waiting on approval.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does say FSA and HSA eligible as well. So
yeah. Oh, there you go. Good.
Yeah.
Nice.
I'll link to that as well in the show notes. But yeah, okay. The next question is, can hormones be influenced with any clinical significance by diet and nutrition?
So bottom line is the question is clinical significance. I don't know that there are any studies that have looked at the effect of diet and nutrition on hormonal levels. Most of what is known is anecdotal, meaning experience based, and it's really all about eating a balanced diet. And I put another link in the document that can be shared. Just a nice, good summary, easy to read, that talks about this.
Well, what are your thoughts on kind of bouncing off of that, on like cycle syncing with like nutrition and then also exercise? Like doing different forms of exercise at different points in your cycle.
Bottom line, Grace, is if it works, do it. I would never discourage that because, among other things, it leads to a healthy lifestyle. And if you find benefit in doing that, managing diet adjustments in the course of your cycle and intermittent exercise, by all means, go for it.
Okay. The next question is about postpartum health. What are your thoughts on postpartum health? That's pretty vague, but you just want to give us maybe a little synopsis.
So I'll try my best. Don't rush. I mean, I've experienced postpartum health only through the eyes of my wife. And so, I tried to frame this in things that I saw in her. Don't rush. Everything happens in its time. We live in such a fast society that it's second nature. Well, for some, it's first nature, to just constantly be on the go. At the same time, prioritize self-care. You guys all know this as moms, you're not going to find hours that you can devote to self-care. It's just not possible. But if you can find even a few minutes, 2 or 3 times a week, or, maybe as frequently as daily, that you can get away and just have quiet, in your last podcast a couple of weeks ago, Patricia, I think I recall you talking about the value of that nap,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Those are the things that you have to really prioritize. You're not going to cheat your child out of any part of life, okay?
Mm-hmm.
In fact, if you expend yourself and overextend yourself, you stand the risk of actually cheating your child probably more than you do if you really make time for yourself. Another I think common mom trait is to hold yourself responsible, when you're really not the one responsible. Resist the temptation to take on responsibility that's not yours. And then finally, I suggest that if you don't have this, you get a copy of a little black book called Mother Love. It's available through the Confraternity of Christian Mothers, and you read it. Just read a little bit of it every day, even if you read it 5 times in the course of your motherhood or more. I mean, it's a really wonderful little mother assist book. I used to give it out to my moms, in my clinical practice.
I think I have more than one, actually. So, yeah.
So those would be my thoughts in answer to that question, Noelle.
Yeah, I love that.
So really what you're talking about is balance.
It's balance.
Yeah.
The 21st century buzzword is life balance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And if I can just add, from the standpoint of a mother, referring to that nap, and if you tie it into breastfeeding, it has a huge impact on your milk supply if you take time to rest with your baby. It's also good in terms of bonding with your baby. So for me, nap time was a non-negotiable at our house, and you guys remember it, even if you weren't actually napping and you were like pretending. And even if I knew you were pretending, it didn't matter because you were in your room,
Yeah.
So I think that teaching that to your kids, that self-care and rest are not a bad thing, I think that it can be very influential to them as well.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing, obviously, and this to all of you, in teaching your kids, about self-care by those activities, you're also instilling in them, some fundamental building blocks of discipline, of self-discipline.
Yeah.
It's good.
Very important great reminder for us in the thick of it.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a couple more questions here, and then we really want to talk about your book, so we'll save time for that. Okay, what are the best ways to help regulate a mood naturally when your hormones are a little bit off?
So I'm going to take this answer, I think, a little broader than just when your hormones are off. If your hormones are off, say that 5 times really fast, by the way. If your hormones are off, you need to, get that addressed. I mean, there are hormonal manipulations, hormonal, remedies that can be employed. That said, what works to help with mood regulation, overall is certainly going to also help if you have hormones that really, aren't where they need to be. And one of them, again, I put a link in the document. There's a book called Happiness is a Choice. It's by 2 physicians, Frank Minirth and Paul Meyer. It was published back in 2013. I actually think it was published before then, but I have a 2013 copy of it. Before I picked this book up, at the advice of a counselor, I had no concept of the understanding that I could choose to be happy. I thought my happiness was a product of everything and everyone that, was around me. And wow, what an eye-opening journey that was, and continues to be. I mean, it was just very, very revealing, and it's very, very well written and very good advice. I also put a link in Emotional Regulation. There are 5 evidence-based regulation techniques. You can click that link and also learn some very good basic stuff. I just finally want to add the best definition of depression that I've ever known. Now, I will say there are familial, traits that include depression. Okay, I'm not really speaking about all depression, but a very trustworthy definition of most depressive disorders is this: depression is anger turned inward.
Is that?
Yeah, I'll let that sit with you a little bit.
That was a verbal instruction. I've read it, but it was a verbal for me first time. Was also from my counselor. It was a verbal instruction. I didn't realize I was angry. I never used the word anger because I didn't believe I was angry. And if we get to my book, you'll and you decide you want to read it, you'll learn, because I write about it, that yes, I was almost consumed with anger. I called it everything else, but I was consumed with anger, and I lived through some really pretty dark days because of it.
Yeah. I think this is a great segue into chatting about your book, because my mom and I have actually both read it, and I thought it was amazing. It was really, really cool to see a glimpse into your inner world and just what brought you to where you are today, and to know you as a doctor, for a physician, and then, a musician as well at our church. And then to see what all has brought you to that point was very fascinating and very encouraging as well. So yeah, I don't know. Mom, do you want to say anything about it?
Well, for one, I thought it was a fairly easy read. So it's not something that you'd be intimidated at all by reading. It was entertaining, but also I could really relate to a lot of things that you said. And I think depending on where you are in life, there's probably different things that you would relate to. But I think overall, most people could find something in it that resonates with them. So, and I really have to say that one of the things that I really appreciated about it was your vulnerability. And that is not something that you always get when people are writing, I don't know, do you call it a memoir? I don't know what it's technically called, but I don't think that people necessarily tend to be that vulnerable. So I appreciated that, because I value vulnerability, and I feel like that's the only way that you can truly understand somebody. So I think that that's very vital to the story. So I appreciated that.
Yeah, well, so the title of the book is kind of unusual. It's called Have You Seen Grandma's Bra? And, there is a chapter that bears the same title that is the story of a Saturday. And to just back up to, kind of a 30,000 foot view, it is a memoir, kind of an autobiography, but it's not my entire life. And, all families have certain levels of dysfunction. My family of origin was no different. My mother, we've spent a fair bit of time talking about depression and anxiety. My mom was afflicted with her own, poor self-image. She lived with depression and anxiety much of her life, certainly all of her life life that I knew her. And I was her oldest son. I have two older sisters. I was not the oldest child, but I was the oldest son. And I was also the apple of her eye. And as a consequence, I took on at a very young age responsibility for my mom's happiness, that nobody ever said, hey, don't do this. This is not healthy. But, I grew up thinking if I did this, my mom would be happy. Or if I did this. In fact, I mentioned early on, one of my mom's biggest disappointments, I think, in life was that I didn't go into music.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a book about that sort of dysfunction. I tried to, inject the humor that exists around all of that, because humor is really important. If you don't have a sense of humor, if you can't laugh, you're in trouble.
Yeah, no kidding.
But there's some kind of painful moments as well. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, when it was a 20-year project. I mean, that chapter started in 2006. That was when that Saturday occurred. And I wrote the book starting about February of last year. I finally started to put the pieces together and, bring it to fruition. And at one point in adoration in our chapel at our church, the good Lord told me that Mike, you have to write this. And I knew exactly what he was talking about, and it was something that I never considered. And I said out loud at 2:00 in the morning, oh no, I'm not going to write that. Gee, I simply can't write that. And I heard him gently say, yes, you can. And it was the part, for those of you also know that I wrote about my relationship with my dad. And that was not part of the original. It was that was the part that Jesus was encouraging me to write about, because we all grow up wounded. I mean, our parents did the best they could with what they had been given. Another thing that I never knew until, I learned it through counseling. I will never forget when my counselor said, your parents did the best they could with what they'd been given. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, why didn't anybody ever tell me that before? It just changes your perspective. So ultimately, it's a book about forgiveness and mercy, mostly God's ocean of mercy, as I've come to call it. And, how he, in the darkest of times, he had me in the palm of his hand. And, I was where I needed to be all the time. So.
Yeah. I just so it's been a couple months since I read the book. I think maybe January or February. But I just remember when I was reading the book, how much it impacted me just being a mom and a parent, because there were so many I was reading the book. Austin and I were laying in bed one night and I was reading it and I was just crying. I was tearing up because the words were so touching to me, and I can't pinpoint exactly what it was I was reading at that time. But there was something that was so healing to me reading it as a parent. And he was like, you're crying? What's this book about? Have you seen Grandma's bra? You're crying about this? Is this supposed to be funny? I'm I don't know. I'm emotional. I don't know why. But no, there's some really great caveats, or not caveats, nuggets that you can really take out of there that were really healing for me as a parent. And just to hear from somebody who has gone through so much more life than I have, that hey, it is really hard, but it's all going to be okay in the end, is just so hope-filled for somebody who's going through something hard.
Yeah. So there's another chapter called Whiskey Water. My mom used to give us hot toddies, whiskey, warm water, and sugar, and they were delicious. And I recalled in the middle of a work day at the office one day, I was mixing my own drinks by the time I was 6 years old. I would go to the refrigerator, and I just convinced myself that I had a cough or I had a stuffy nose and I needed, I needed a hot toddy. So I went and made myself. I figured them.
That's so funny.
They were definitely different times, though.
Oh, definitely different times.
Sure.
Well, I think
you're not the only one I've heard that.
Yeah, I write also that if I had, allowed my own children to do that, I probably could have had them taken away from me.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was a totally different time.
Yes.
I also, learned professionally that, gosh, I probably had all the makings of, an alcoholic, because, early exposure is really a big thing. So anyway, yeah, it was cathartic, but it was also, I mean, my goal really has been, one person can read the book and have, take away something that helps them, along their life's journey, then, whatever work I put into it will have been worth the effort.
Yeah, to me, what stands out is that you heard God say, Mike, I need you to write this book, and you did it. And to me, that says that somebody needed to hear the words that you have.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see where it goes. Your listeners, if they're interested, can find it on Amazon, barnesandnoble.com.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen Grandma's Bra? Has a great photo on the front that was professionally done, by the way.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was the real star of the book is my wife, Jenny. Probably 15 years ago, I told her one evening as we were talking about something that she had saved my life. And she looked at me like I was from a different planet. She didn't have any idea why I would say something like that. I read the book to her. Reading is not high on her priority list. But pre-publication, I read the book to her. It was a challenging thing because frankly there was a lot of stuff in there that I had never really shared with her. But I hope now that, and I think she does know that she has in fact saved my life. I really could not be here now were it not for her presence and her love and her ability to forgive me as many times as the good Lord has forgiven me.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Isn't that what the vocation of marriage is all about?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully we will all be able to say that for sure.
Awesome.
And now I think we've totally broken your time limit and
That's all right.
I was going to say it's totally fine. No worries at all. But so you said our listeners can find you you have a website as well.
Yes.
Right?
So I had some really great help putting together my social media presence. I don't do social media. And that help is part of this conversation. Thank you, Noelle.
You're welcome.
And yes, so you can find me on social media at Michael Skoch MD. It's the tag that you can find me. There's also a website, same michaelskochmd.com, and I'll just actually throw out another little thing. So my oldest son Ben and I, hopefully by the end of this year, will have another book published.
Oh wow.
This one is called Dead Serious, and the subtitle is They Didn't Tell Us These Things in Medical School.
Wow, that sounds.
And Ben is my son. Ben is a hospice doc. He does hospice and palliative care. So we talk about end of life, and it contains stories of real patients that we both have served in at the end of life. And yeah, so that's been kind of a fun project too. It'll hopefully be coming by the end of the year. So.
Wow,
that's awesome.
That sounds incredible.
I imagine you could write lots of books.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Is this what you plan to do for like your retirement? Is like write a bunch of books, or do you know?
I don't know about a bunch, but
that would be great.
I know there's a third book out there.
Ooh.
And this one is actually about motherhood.
Wow.
And it'll be called Blessed Be God. And I am really going out on a limb here because this is like a dream at the moment. Mm-hmm. But the title of it is Blessed Be God. The divine praises that are said at benediction. Blessed be God, blessed be his holy name. Yeah. So the title of the book is Blessed Be God. And it'll be about motherhood.
Wow. Everybody go follow him on social media.
Yes.
Number one, because I made the account.
Right.
Number one, because he's going to release several books over the next 18 months, and you got to be there for it. You want to stay tuned.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for spending your time with us and sharing your wisdom. I think our listeners will get so much from this episode. So thank you.
Well,
yes.
This has been an absolute joy for me to see and be with all of you. You guys are just wonderful and keep doing the great things that you do in your respective corners of the world, because that's exactly what God wants you to do.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We appreciate
Patricia, great to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you. I think one thing that I did not mention that I need to is that I kind of alluded to it, but the fact that Rob and I were watching you and Jenny and your kids, and you really were just like the generation above us. So we've had the great pleasure of watching your kids grow up and also learning a lot of things from that. And I guess that what I hope to take from that is then to pass that down to future generations too. And it's just beautiful to see as you get older. And I think you girls will realize this also as you get older, but that you really, even like, I'm just a humble housewife, right? But maybe we can all make a difference, you know? And I would like really, I just have to say that, Mike, you made a difference in our lives, in all of our lives, every single one of us. And so we are very, very grateful for that.
Well, thanks, Patricia. I like to think of it as, you know, God made a difference through me.
Absolutely.
I try to be like Mother Teresa, you know, I just want to be a pencil in his hand. And, you know, if his grace is able to touch, you know, folks because of what I say or do, well, you know, may his name be praised. Yeah.
Amen.
Beautiful.
That is beautiful.
What a great inspiration. Yeah. Well, thanks again for joining us, Dr. Skoch.
Yep. Thanks for the invite.
That was today's conversation, and now it's your turn.
Who can you make room for this week?
Who might need an invitation, a listening ear, or a seat at your table?
It doesn't have to be perfect, just open.
We'll be back next time, gathered again with stories, faith, and family. Until then,
pull up a chair and follow us on Instagram at Room for More Podcast. There is always one more seat at the table.